The Adventures of Superman, Superman on Earth. Krypton, July 1981. Krypton is a great civilization on the fringes of death. For an untold number of centuries, they existed, a proud civilization that resembles the people of Earth. If you put them next to an average Earthling, they're indistinguishable, completely indistinguishable, except that the Kryptonians have genetically modified themselves through the centuries. So, even though they look and sound human, they are capable of some superhuman feats that the normal human's not capable of. Well, unfortunately, their civilization is coming to a close. Over the centuries, their sun had grown bigger and bigger and bigger, now to super red giant on the verge of exploding. We go now to Kryptonopolis, the capital city of Krypton. Well, we see flying out of the bustling Kryptonian city a lone sky car belonging to a very important man of Krypton. His name is Jor-El as he flies by. Jor-El's sky car enters the hangar of his giant palace-like complex. Jor-El is not only the top scientist of Krypton, but he's also the ruler of Krypton. Really, a figurehead, for the king of Krypton no longer wields the true political power that the Kryptonian monarchy once wielded. Now the king just serves as the head of the Kryptonian High Council. The High Council is what really rules Krypton. And the king himself, Jor-El, has always been at odds against the council and their decision, and their decision of late is really troubling him. Jor-El happens to be a very talented scientist, and he has been studying the Kryptonian sun named Rao for quite some time, and he has found overwhelming evidence that Rao's days are numbered. It is going to go supernova at any moment. Could be today, could be tomorrow, could be next week, it could be next year. No one knows, but it's showing signs that it's going to go kaboom soon. And he has presented his findings to the Great Kryptonian Council, and all they did was deny him, say that his findings are faulty, and sided with a female scientist who happens to be his equal and rival in the scientific community. So now he had no other choice but to enact his second plan in case the council would not listen to him and evacuate the planet. As Jor-El walks down the halls of his palace, a golden humanoid robot floats up to him, followed by another robot right behind him. The robot says, "Your Majesty, what is going on?" Jor-El turns to look at the floating robot. He says, "Kelex, the council has rejected me again, so initiate my plan. Inform the others who listen to me that we're going with the evacuation orders. And after you send the message, you and Kelor will proceed to load the birthing matrix onto the pod. And I will make the final arrangements to have it launched." Then Jor-El proceeded to give another order, and he says to Kelex, "And please tell Lady Laura to meet me in my main laboratory. It's an urgent matter." Kelex says, "Yes, Master." Him and the other robot turn around and fly off. As Jor-El walks down the hall, he makes it into his main laboratory. His laboratory was high-tech. It had a huge holographic projector in the center, and several other high-tech gadgets around it. His wife was in there already waiting, wearing her traditional Kryptonian nutrient suit garments and her elaborate crown. She then proceeds to ask Jor-El the question, "My husband, what is going on?" Jor-El says, "Well, Laura, it's what I feared. The council has said no, and they warned me if I spread panic, I will be arrested and sent to the Phantom Zone. So we're going to have to enact the plan that I told you about." Then Laura proceeds to say, "But Jor-El, are you sure it's the right thing to do? Sending our unborn child into a strange planet where his genetic engineering will cause him to defy the planet's gravity and have superhuman strength, and who knows what other powers he might be able to wield. Jor-El says to his wife, "We have no other choice. Our son must survive. Someone must survive. And I don't like this plan either, but it's the only choice we have left." Then Jor-El proceeds to hit a bunch of buttons on a holographic interface, and a giant holographic image engulfs the center of the room, showing Kansas farmers on Earth working out in the field. One had his shirt off as he was toiling at the wheat field. Laura says, "Oh dear God, look at that savage with his shirt off, showing his skin. Oh," she says, "this is sickening," she complains. "Sending our son out there with these savages. There's so many centuries behind us." Jor-El says to her, "Well, it's the only planet I could find where a Kryptonian could live among them undetected." Then he proceeds to continue. "My only fear is that he'll use his powers to conquer them and enslave them and try to be their ruler. That's my only fear right now." Then Laura asks Jor-El, "But what about us? He will never know his Kryptonian heritage." But then Jor-El interrupted her and said, "Oh, he will learn his Kryptonian heritage. He won't totally be alone." Jor-El goes over to one of the tables in his laboratory and pulls up a metallic object of a strange design. It even have a little ceramic blue egg on top of it. He then says to Laura, "This device here contains all 1 million years of Kryptonian history, knowledge, scientific advancements, philosophies, and entertainment. And it also contains copies of our minds and the minds of prominent citizens and the Kryptonian High Council. He will never be alone. And this will build a fortress at a designated spot that I chose." Then Jor-El continues to explain, "When he reaches his 18th year on Earth, it will call to him, and then it will guide him to the designated spot where once he casts it into the spot, it will build the fortress, and there he'll learn about who he is, what he is, and about us." Then Jor-El finishes his explanation by saying, "Hopefully this will be enough so he doesn't abuse his power and try to conquer the people of Earth." "Well, let's go," he says to Laura. "I think Helix and Kalor should be finished loading the birthing matrix onto the rocket." Then the two proceeded to go to the lift and take it down to the third laboratory. The two exited the lift into the third laboratory where Helix and Kalor had just completed the installation of the birthing matrix onto the rocket that's going to take it to Earth. Jor-El walks over to the pod and places the egg-like metallic device that he designed to keep all of Krypton's knowledge into a small niche on the pod. As soon as he puts it in there, the door closes, sealing up the niche with that device inside. As Jor-El walks away, he hears a voice of the computer says, "Fueling complete. The rocket is ready for launch." Jor-El turns to look and says, "Well, I don't like it either," he tells his wife. "But that's the only choice we have left." He sees Laura's eyes welling up with tears. He quickly walks over to her and embraces her and gives her a kiss and is like, "Honey, I don't like this either, but he's gotta live. And he's gonna live. I mean, come on. Quit crying," he says. I can't bear to see you cry. I mean, you have to be strong. Kryptonian women are always known for being strong." Laura says, "I just can't bear the thought of sending my son to such a savage planet. There's gotta be some other way. There's gotta be." Jor-El says, "Honey, calm down, honey. Calm down. Let's take a deep breath. Listen, we've talked about this. It's the only choice we have left. Come on, let's just be strong. Be strong. Be happy." Well, their sad and somber moment was interrupted by a violent earthquake that had begun. Laura's like, "Jor-El, what's going on?" It's too late. The sun, that thing's gonna collapse. But then, as quick as it started, the earthquake stopped. But it was not over. Pieces of the palace were still falling all over the place. Jarrell hurried as he could hear the sound of debris falling from the ceilings. The palace was going to come down. He quickly headed to the control panel and began the process of activating the rocket. He activates the holographic control panel and begins inputting the telemetry, the coordinates, and the information for the rocket as quick as he could. Jarrell busied along, pressing every button on the holographic interface, trying to race against the clock before the next earthquake happens or even the sun explodes. It was maddening, but he was making progress. And then finally, eureka, he struck gold. The sequence was initiating. The little rocket pod was powering up and starting to lift off. Well, the ship slowly lifted off until it started picking up speed, leaving the skylight of the laboratory. It was heading into orbit and finally breaking free of the planet's gravity, and it began initiating the warp sequence. Finally, it went into hyperspace and shot off into the distance, bringing the unborn Kryptonian child Kal-El to Earth to safety. Meanwhile, after the pod left the system, the great son of Krypton, Rao, begins its final phase of death. Another violent earthquake punctuates the landscape of Krypton, followed by the collapse of the star and the violent explosion that preceded the collapse of the star, destroying the once great planet Krypton and all its inhabitants, leaving nothing behind but a memory. Meanwhile, in the rocket pod, the embryo of Kal-El was safely developing within the birthing matrix as the pod was taking him to his new home on Earth, which would exactly take 9 months. The pod flew through many star systems, many planets, and many other celestial objects on its way to Earth. As he was flying through space, the voice of his father was speaking to him in a recorded message, explaining to him all the different places they were passing by, celestial bodies, planets, stars, on his way to Earth. Well, 9 months later, the journey was coming to a close as they entered the Earth's solar system. As soon as they got near the Earth moon, the ship dropped out of warp and was making descent to the Earth. Meanwhile, in Smallville, Kansas, it was April 13th, 1982. It was a very nice and warm spring day as Jonathan and Martha Kent, a married couple in their early 30s, they've tried for years to have kids, but no luck. We're going to get their wish to have a child. Well, they were on the side of the road. They were luckily on their property. Jonathan just got done fixing the busted radiator hose in his early 1970s silver Dodge pickup truck. He closes the hood of the truck. Martha comes up and says, "Oh dear, are we going to get home?" Jonathan says, "Yes, I did a quick fix. It's not permanent, but I'll have to wait till tomorrow to get the new hose for it." And luckily I had water in the back of the truck and filled it up, just enough to get us home. Luckily, we were on the property. Jonathan said, "Oh, come on, let's go. I'm hungry." As soon as they get in the truck, Martha hears a whining noise like it was coming from the air. She asked Jonathan, "Jonathan, do you hear that loud whining noise coming? It sounds like it's getting louder. It sounds like it's coming from the sky." Jonathan's like, "Martha, I hear that too." He opens the truck and gets out and puts his hands over his eyes to look at the nice spring sky. He hears the noise, but he couldn't see it. Martha gets out and does the same thing too. Suddenly, Jonathan and Martha see a giant fireball pierce a big cloud as it was headed right for the direction they were standing in. The two of them quickly ran out the way as the fireball was coming very close to the truck. They leapt for safety as the fireball was coming. After the spectacular explosion, the two of them got up to look around. The truck was still intact. It missed the truck. It was raining pieces of clumps of dirt and rock. They saw where the object crashed at. It crashed on their property, just about a few feet away from their pickup truck. They go and look, and they see a ditch followed by a flaming object at the end of that giant ditch. Jonathan and Martha leap over the fencing of their property to go and investigate the object that crashed. As they came right up to the flaming object, the flames were beginning to die down. Martha's like, "Jonathan, look, it's not a meteorite. It looks like it's some sort of object. It looks like a little rocket ship. Could it be some sort of Russian satellite or something, or an American satellite?" Jonathan says, I don't know, Martha. It's nothing like I've seen before. It's nothing like I've ever seen in any science magazines that I read. Suddenly, the bracket that was holding the birthing matrix on top releases the matrix as it lets out a hiss of gases and everything. The two of them freak out and jump back. Well, after the matrix was let go, Jonathan got a little courage and approached the craft. Suddenly, the egg-like matrix on top of the craft began to dissolve away. As it dissolved away, it revealed what looked like a newborn baby. Even had the umbilical cord cut. Jonathan's like, "My God, Martha, it's a baby. It's a newborn." Martha comes running up and sees, is like, "Oh, dear God in heaven, Jonathan, those Russians, those godless communists, they're sending children up in space." Jonathan gets another look at the pod, and he says to Martha, "I don't think this is a communist craft or any Russian craft that I've seen. I think this is extraterrestrial." Martha says to Jonathan angrily, "Nonsense, Jonathan. This is man-made. Can't you tell? Come on," she said. She takes off her little sweater and grabs the baby and wraps him up. It even was still soaked in amniotic fluid. Jonathan's like, "Martha, I don't think this is human whatsoever. This looks like it was an artificial womb, and whatever the ship was carrying this unborn child until he was born on Earth. Actually, born here in America, so he's an American now. Come on, let's go," he says to his wife before this explosion gets noticed and people start coming around looking. "Maybe later on I'll come and get this thing and hide it," said Jonathan. The two couples went onto their trucks, started it up, and drove off. Well, sure enough, later on that night, Jonathan returned. His worst fear did not happen. No one came to investigate the explosion. He found a way to load the heavy pod onto his pickup truck and took it and hid it in the basement of his barn. Well, thus began the new life of Kal-El. He was named after his wife's maiden name, Clark. Now Clark Kent was growing up as the years passed by. Spring turned to summer, summer turned to autumn, and autumn turned to winter. As the cycle of life kept on, Clark Kent just grew up and had a normal life until one day in 1994, when he was 12 years old, he comes home from school early. His mother, Martha, was getting dinner ready when he comes home. She hears the door close, and she's like, "Jonathan, is that you? You're done on the field early." When she turned to look, it was Clark. She says to Clark, surprised, "Clark, what are you doing home early from school?" Clark was like, "Mom, Am I normal? Martha stopped what she was doing and said, "What do you ask that question for, Clark?" Well, Clark goes on and says, "Well, Mom, when I was in PE today at school, we were playing baseball. Of course, one of the guys hit the baseball hard and then it went somewhere. We all were looking for it, except I found it, but the way I found it was not normal, Mom. It was behind a big rock. But the thing is, Mom, I found it behind the rock. I didn't look behind the rock. I saw through the rock." Martha was puzzled. "What?" "Yes, Mom, I saw through the rock like an x ray machine. And then I just picked it up and gave it back to the guys. And then I just noticed that I was seeing everybody's bones. I was seeing through everybody. I asked the teacher to be excused. I told him I was really getting sick. He excused me and I ran back home. It stopped. I somehow, someway gained control of this power, of this ability, and but now I'm finding out if I can really concentrate, just focus on something, I could see right through it. Mom, what is it with me?" Martha just sits down next to her son and says, "Son, um, how can I explain this? I mean, yeah, you're not, you look human, you sound human, but me and your dad don't know if you're actually human or not." Clark was like, "What do you mean, Mom?" Martha was like, "Well, Clark, you were found in some sort of spaceship, satellite, or something. We thought you were some godforsaken Russian experiment sending children up into space, but as you started to get older, I mean, at 5 years old, you were as strong as a grown man, and then at 8, you started leaping like there was no tomorrow. You could leap really high, and we thought, just keep it a secret as much as you can. Just say you were extraordinary, but now this is going on. Clark, you're not human, or at least maybe you're human, maybe you're a mutant, maybe you're in a genetic experiment. I don't know." And then Martha went on to explain the whole situation, how they found him. Well, later on that afternoon, Jonathan comes home, and Martha explains what happened to her husband. Jonathan's like, "Come on, son, let me show you something." Jonathan takes Clark to the barn. He opens the two giant doors of the barn and takes Clark to the entrance of the basement. They open the basement into the barn and walk down the stairs. There in the basement, covered in a giant tarp, was the rocket pod that brought Clark to Earth. Jonathan yanks the tarp off, lifting a cloud of dust that had settled over the years. He says, "Son, this is what brought you to Earth. We don't know if you're a Russian experiment. We don't know if you're extraterrestrial. We just don't know. I assume you're extraterrestrial because this is nothing like I've ever seen. This does not look anything man-made." Clark examines the pod close. He even puts his hands and feels it. The metal even felt weird. "Yes," said Jonathan. "You feel that? It's not like any metal that I felt before." And then he gives Clark an object that he found in the niche in the pod. This object had an egg shape on top, almost looked like a miniaturized version of the pod, but with a different design. When Clark held it in his hand, he noticed it was just no bigger than the size of a Coke can. And he says, "Dad, is this brought me to Earth?" Jonathan said, "Yeah, I don't know. Like I said, we don't know who you are and what you are, but I do know one thing. Me and your mother love you. You're our son. We raised you since we found you 12 years ago. And now your mother has told me about your x-ray abilities." Clark said, "Yeah, I can't believe it. I I could see through things now." Well, the years went on again, and more of Clark's powers and abilities manifested, like flight, super speed, and his strength was getting stronger and stronger beyond that of a normal man. We now arrive to the year 2000, April 13th. Clark Kent was turning 18. Martha was busying on the kitchen, getting all the food ready for the party. Jonathan comes in and sees his wife just busy as a bee in the kitchen with all the food and everything she's cooking. He asks her, Martha, what's this big feast you're planning? Martha stops and turns around and just tells her husband, "Seriously, Jonathan? Seriously? You don't remember what today is?" Jonathan looks puzzled, scratching his head. Martha says, "Today's the day where 18 years ago we found a little baby in a pod." Jonathan's like, "Oh, land of Goshen. It's Clark's 18th birthday?" Said Jonathan. Martha said, "Yes, and I'm trying to get everything ready for his big 18th birthday party tonight." Oh, no. And Jonathan says, "Well, okay. I'll let me go put up the tractor and I'll help you. I'm already done with all the stuff outside." And Martha looks and it's like, "Oh, thank you, Jonathan. I really do need the help." Jonathan stops and asks, "Where is Clark anyways?" "Oh, I got him distracted with a lot of needless errands and chores to keep him away for hours. He'll be back home on time to get himself ready for the party." Jonathan lets out a smile. "All right, let me go pull the tractor into the barn." "Man, I can't believe it. 18 years already. It's amazing how the time just goes," he says as he walks off. Meanwhile, that night, Clark's big birthday party was in full swing. All his friends from high school were there, and many of the neighbors and friends of the Kents. But there was one person that Clark really wanted there. It was his girlfriend, Lana Lang. The two of them had grown up together as children and were dating. And they were, getting serious. Lana was hoping that Clark would be the one that she gets to settle down with. Most people in Smallville usually marry their high school sweethearts. But Clark had other plans. He loved Lana, but he wanted to go to college. He wanted to be a reporter. Plus, he had other problems. His powers and ability. He didn't know how he was going to keep it a secret from Lana. Well, as the party went on, Clark just decided to go outside and get a breather. He goes outside, walks out into the field, looks into the night sky, and just takes a big whiff of that fresh country air. Well, Lana had noticed he had gone outside, and she walks out to see what's going on. She comes up to Clark. "Clark, what's going on?" Clark turns around to face the beautiful young blonde-haired and blue-eyed Lana Lang. She was the cheerleader at Smallville High, actually the captain of the cheerleading squad. Most people wondered why in the world she ever went for Clark, the mild-mannered young man who was terrible at sports and was just an all-around geeky guy. But nonetheless, she loved Clark, and Clark loved her. She asked Clark, "What's going on? Tired of your own party already?" Clark says, "No, I don't know, just nervous, probably. Today I turned 18, and then next month we graduate high school, then I'm off to college." Lana says, "Don't remind me. It's going to be hard being away from you for so long." Clark says, I know. It's going to be hard being away from you for, 4 years. But we still have the summer and spring break and all that stuff to be with each other." Lana said, "Yes, you're right, we do. At least we have that." Well, their little romantic moment was interrupted. Clark was hearing something, but he noticed that Lana was not hearing it. He noticed that he was the only one hearing it, but it was not a physical sound. This hum was in his head. He didn't know where this hum was coming from, but the hum was just getting louder and louder, and he looked and it seemed like it was coming from the barn. It was a very annoying and very distracting hum. He was starting to give him a headache. Lana noticed that he was pained. He's like, "Clark, what's going on? Clark, what's going on?" Clark's like, "Lana, oh God, my head. There's a humming noise. Oh, my head." Suddenly, as quick as it began, the humming stopped. And then Clark was feeling better. Lana's like, "Are you okay, Clark? What humming noise in your head?" He says to her, "It's okay, Lana, it's okay. You know what? Can you just let me be alone for a minute? I'll join you back at the party. Maybe it's just too much stress. Lana looked and was like, "Okay, Clark, but the minute there's something wrong, please tell me or your parents, please." Clark's like, "Okay, Lana, I promise. Anything goes wrong, you're the first to know." Well, after Lana left, Clark wondered what the hell was that humming noise in his head. Suddenly, it began again. and Clark was it was annoying. Clark thinks that the humming was calling him to the barn, so he wandered onto the barn. As he got to the barn and got to the basement, the humming stopped. Well, Clark looked at the workbench by the pod. The weird object that he was shown when he was 12 years old, the egg, the egg-like object on top was glowing, was just glowing on and off, even though it was not a light bulb. Clark just wondered how it was doing that. He walked to the workbench, grabbed the object out of just like it was like an instinct. He put his hand on the egg-like object on top of that weird thing, and all of a sudden he felt or heard a voice in his head that said, "Ellesmere Island, Canada. Ellesmere Island, Canada." And then it stopped, and it stopped glowing. Clark put the object back on the workbench. Ellesmere Island, Canada. Why? Well, after the party was over, he assured Lana that he was okay, that the whatever was bothering him was gone. Then he went to tell his parents about what happened, and he told them what the object was telling him, telepathically. So, his parents were like, "You're leaving us, Clark?" Well, Clark was like, "No, I'm not leaving you. I have a few weeks before I start summer school, so maybe I can head out to Ellesmere Island and see why that object wants me to go there. And plus, you forget, I have other ways to travel now besides going on plane." Jonathan's like, "Yeah, I forgot, son, you can travel like a plane," as he let out a smile. Finally, in May of 2000, Clark Kent graduated high school and was going to start college, or should I say summer school and college, in early June. He had a week or two before he had to go to summer school at his new college out in the city. So he told Lana he was going to go on a small trip by himself, and then flew to Ellesmere Island. It was cold, it was nasty, but due to Clark's abilities, it was not bothering him. He made it to the spot where it seemed that that object was telling him to go. He pulled the object out of his hiking backpack. It began, or that I should say, the egg object on top began glowing again, on and off. It was almost telling him to throw it. Clark chucked that thing far, and it fell onto a big snow hill. Well, it fell into the hill, and the entire hill and the rocks and the whole thing just collapsed. There was a violent earthquake, and all of a sudden, a giant metallic looking spire in the same color of his pod just began rising out of the ground. Well, it began rising, and then little lights began flickering. It was like, holy crap! It just built an entire building of sorts right in front of him in a matter of seconds. This was truly alien technology. He was truly not human. He was just starting to figure that out now. Clark walked over to the building, and it seemed that most of it was underground. What he was seeing was just the top half. Well, he looked around and he saw a giant tube, or what looked like an entrance to a elevator. He was looking for any buttons to press or anything to open that thing up, but when he put his hands on the metal wall, suddenly the where his hand was at was glowing and making weird electronic noises. The lift door opens up. Clark goes into this lift, the door closes, and he feels like he was going down many, many, many levels. He was probably several feet underground. Finally, the lift stops, and the door opens up. Clark saw a room full of, unlike any architecture he's seen, full of objects like a museum. There was a chair there, but the one thing he noticed was robots flying around and making all kinds of weird robotic noises he never heard of before. And as they flew by each other, they were communicating with each other in bizarre electronic beeps and noises. Clark was so curious. What were they saying to each other? They didn't even notice him as they were just flying by, just doing busy work, keeping themselves occupied. But suddenly, that was cut short as one robot noticed him and flew right over to him. The robot began scanning him with a laser, and it finally identified him and it began speaking. It said, "Hello, I am Keelix. I was the servant to your father, His Majesty, Jor-El of Krypton, and your mother, his wife, the Queen, Laura L." Then he went on to say, "Now we will serve you on Earth, here in this Fortress of Solitude." Another little robot came flying in, standing next to him, or floating next to him, saying, "Hello, my name is Kaylor. I too was a servant to your father and your mother, and now I join Keelix here and our new life on Earth in the Fortress of Solitude." Clark looked puzzled, and as he was about to ask a question, Keelix says, "Please do not ask us any question, Lord Kal-El. We will direct you to where your questions will be answered. Your father will want to speak to you." Clark looked puzzled, and he asked the robot, "My father, he's here?" Keelix says, "No, sir, he is not here in a physical sense. Your father has been dead for 19 Earth years, along with our home planet Krypton. It was destroyed by a supernova in July of 1981. But your questions will be answered. Please follow us, Master Kal-El." Well, Clark followed them, and the robots showed him to what looked like a bizarre control panel. The little egg that sat on top of the bizarre artifact that built this fortress had was there, but it had grown in size. It was big. It was probably well over a foot now. Well, Clark walked over to it. The robot, Keelix, says, "Place both your hands on there. The ovoid is telepathic. It will read your mind, and it will also initiate the final startup sequence for this fortress." Clark looked and said, "Well, here goes nothing." He puts both hands on the giant ceramic ovoid. Suddenly, it was like he couldn't describe it. Something went into his mind, a force, data or something, and then it just began scanning his mind for everything, and then it took information from his mind and also put information in his mind. The process was painful as Clark was getting a very bad headache, and it was also seemed to be taking too long. Suddenly, it was over. Clark was dizzy, something he'd never experienced in his life, but once the dizziness was over, he realized something. He had memories in his head. Memories were not there before, like how to speak a language he didn't know. Could it be his native language? In his mind, it registered as Kryptonian native language. Suddenly, he heard a deep voice calling him, and it said, "My son, Kal-El, you have activated the final process of this Fortress of Solitude." Clark looked all over. He's like, "Who are you? Where are you? What?" And then suddenly, a bright light appeared in front of him, and then it was a holographic image of a man wearing a skin-tight black suit with a blue center, and above it was a blue tunic-like cape, and it had a yellow pattern on there. What that yellow pattern meant, he didn't know. And also on the arms of the tunic and the legs was a white frill-like thing that went up the arms and the legs of the tunic. His head was covered in the skin-tight black hood that was part of the suit. The hologram identified himself as like, "Kal-El, I am your father, Jor-El. I have been dead for 19 of your Earth years. You have reached your 18th year on Earth. So let me tell you who you are and what you are. You come from a planet named Krypton. It was a once great planet, and we were a mighty civilization of people. We were advanced in sciences and the art. We achieved a lot in 1 million years, but unfortunately, we couldn't achieve a way to save ourselves from the death of our star. I knew the death was coming, but the council had rejected my proposals and my theories, and well, that's why you're here, and that's why I'm merely a hologram. I managed to copy my mind onto the data egg. Clark looked, and the hologram knew what he was puzzled about. Yes, we call it the data egg because it resembles an egg. But in reality, it's one of the most advanced data storages we have. It stored the entire scientific knowledge and discovery of Kryptonian civilization, the knowledge of art, music, entertainment, philosophies, while it was part of the greater builder device. Builder devices was the metallic thing that the data egg was attached to as part of one unit. This built the Fortress of Solitude that you're in by a means called nanoassembly. It took the ice, then the rock molecules, and converted into metallic molecules, and built this Fortress of Solitude, and built everything which was in the data egg's memory. Thus, you have a new home here. But then Clark interrupted the holographic image of his father, and he says, "But father, I have a home. Martha and Jonathan Kent, the people who found me and raised me as their son." The hologram looked at Clark and said, "Yes, I am forever thankful to them for finding you and raising you and giving you such good, strong moral value." Then he went on to say, "Just ask me anything, anything you want." Clark asked the first thing that popped in his mind, "My powers, where do they come from?" Jor-El looks at him and says, "Your powers are the result of many centuries of genetic engineering with our people. We freely modified ourselves genetically with each generation, and your powers are the result of this. Unfortunately, if you were back on our home planet, or any planet that has a red sun or red star, you would have no powers. But here on this planet, where you have a yellow star, you have powers. Your body is like a giant photovoltaic cell. It's absorbing the radiation of the yellow sun and stored it inside. Thus, it's giving you powers. So each time you use your power, it comes from the stored energy in your cells. And anytime you are in the sun, it recharges you." Clark's like, "So I'm a giant meat battery. That's funny." Jor-El also let out a slight chuckle. "Yes, you could say that, a meat battery." So Jor-El gives him a very detailed tour of the Fortress of Solitude. He even showed him one of the neatest things that fascinated Clark. It was chambers. Each chamber contained a holographic representation of different time periods of Krypton. Clark said, "Wow, it's just like Star Trek, the Holosuite." The Jor-El hologram looked at him and was like, "Yes, it is a Holosuite. These chambers recreate the holographic images of different time periods of Krypton, but not only just Krypton, anything you want. Even if you want to do a fantasy role-playing thing, you could recreate them here. These chambers were built for both education and leisure." Clark's like, "Wow." Well, after the tour, the Jor-El hologram deactivated itself, and Clark left. He flew back to Smallville, Kansas, and he revealed to his parents what he learned about himself and everything. They were finally happy that their son was happy, that he found out who he was, where he came from. And they were also relieved to find out that, where he came from, and solved a very long, age-old mystery about his origin. Well, the years passed on, and Clark went to college, majored in journalism, and eventually got a journalism degree. He graduated college and did some freelancing for years, just submitting articles to different newspaper. Well, we go to the year 2006. Clark Kent is 24 years old. Well, during his time period of going to college and being a freelance journalist after college, he was visiting the Fortress of Solitude anytime he could, just to learn about himself, learn about his culture, his people, and his history, and advanced sciences that were not yet discovered on Earth. But he felt something. Something was empty. Something he could do with his power. So he goes to the Fortress of Solitude and consults the hologram of his father. He explains what he was feeling. Well, the Jor-El hologram said, "Well, my son, that's simple. You possess great power. You're a virtual god among men. My worst fear, and the worst fear of your mother, was that you would abuse these powers and enslave humanity and rule the planet. But thankfully, your foster parents raised you right and raised you how to be good and how to hide your powers. Well, there is one thing you can do with these powers," said Jor-El. "You could use it to save and help people on Earth. Be a guide to them. Show them that they're not alone. Show them that there's other alien civilizations out there." Clark was thinking. He says to his dad, "I was thinking about this, using my powers to help people as a superhero. They graced the televisions and movies in this planet, and also in the books and other publications. But I don't know." The hologram said, "Son, do it. But remember, when you use your powers, you're going to become a target. The people of Earth are very primitive." Clark says, "I know that, Dad. I know that." Well, after his little conversation with his dad, he goes back home to Smallville and tells his parents of his plan. His mother, Martha, was like, my son, the superhero. I don't know. You should keep your powers to yourself, because what if the government catches you? They're going to dissect you to pieces to find out what makes you tick. You've seen it in every science fiction movie," she says. But his dad was more supportive. Jonathan says, "Son, I think you should be a superhero. With your great powers, you could really uplift humanity. You could just, oh my goodness, you should do this. But you need a secret identity. You just can't be all willy-nilly, just, oh look, I'm a superhero, and then try to live a normal life, because you will become a target," he says. Well, Clark's like, "You're right. But what kind of hero? I need a costume, I need a secret identity, and I don't know where to start," said Clark, puzzled. Well, his mom says, I know where to start. We need to make you a costume. As for a secret identity or an alter ego, you're a very smart young man. You should be able to come up with one quickly." So Clark and his mother got busy trying to design the suit. They went through many designs and a lot of crumpling of paper. Eventually, they settled on a design, a skin-tight blue suit with a S shield on it, red cape, red briefs, a yellow belt with an oval buckle, red boots, and the red cape would have a yellow and black S shield on the back of it. After settling on that design, Martha broke out her shearing scissors and began shearing the lycra spandex and the cape. She shears away until she gets the right length of cloth. After that, she measures Clark and fires up the sewing machine and starts sewing Clark's costume together. She busies herself just guiding the cloth and the spandex to get everything sewn together and everything. After a while, she was finished. Then she said, "Clark, we need a symbol for your costume." Clark says, "Well, Mom, here it is." Clark showed her the stylized S shield that he made, the one that was red and yellow for the front of the suit, and the one that was yellow with the S in black outline that was made for the back of the cape. She takes them, looks at them, is like, at least it'll stretch with the suit when you put it on. So she sews on the first shield onto the front of the blue suit, and then the second shield to the back of the red cape. Afterwards, it was finished. Clark puts on his new superhero costume and just asks his parents, "So, what do you think?" His dad looked, "You look like something straight out of a comic book, son." But I couldn't be any more prouder. Martha asked, "So, what about your secret identity?" Clark said, "That's easy. I'll simply be Clark Kent, and all I'm just going to do is just wear these pairs of glasses and just comb my hair differently. Then when I assume the role or the identity of my alter ego, Superman, I'll just simply take off the glasses and change my hairstyle a quick second, and then I'll be a totally different man with the costume. Well, his dad said, it's very original, Superman. I don't think there's a hero in comic books named Superman, except for that one guy you always like reading and watching his movies. What is his name? Batman? Dad, his dad said, and Clark said, Dad, Batman's a totally different character in a totally different universe. But unlike him, I have powers. Then Clark went on to say, and the good news is, I just secured me a job interview, so I'm leaving in a couple days to Metropolis. His dad's like, Metropolis? Where's that at? His mom was puzzled too. Clark says, Metropolis is in Florida, in the northeastern corner of Florida. Nice, clean city. And I had secured an interview with the Daily Planet, one of the most reputable newspaper in the state and in the country. Well, his dad said, well, I'm proud of you, son. His mom said, yes, I'm proud of you too, son. Well, days later, Clark was in a hustle-bustle metropolis, a modern urban city. It was packed, it was crowded, it was busy like any normal city. He was walking around the streets looking for the Daily Planet building. He wandered around till he found the Daily Planet building, a very old and antiquated building. It was built in the 1930s. It was a beautiful Art Deco architecture. It looked more like a work of art than it did a building. Well, finally, Clark went in through the old-fashioned revolving doors of the Daily Planet building. Inside, it was just a normal building full of people walking around. He walked up to the sign that told him where the editor-in-chief office was at. Its sign said 14th floor. Oh, that's up there, Clark said to himself. So he waited for the elevator to open up. Finally, the elevator arrived in its usual punctual manner. As the doors opened, Clark went into the elevator. He pressed the 14th floor and rode it all the way up to the 14th floor. Clark was surprised that this elevator did not stop on every floor. Soon the elevator arrived to the 14th floor. Then Clark wandered down the hallway until he made it to a receptionist sitting at a desk in front of a huge double doors. He said to the receptionist, hello, my name is Clark Kent. I have an interview with Mr. Perry White. The receptionist looks at the schedule book. She says, yes, Mr. White, let me tell them that you're here. Clark smiles at her and says, thank you. Well, she says, Mr. White in the intercom. Perry White's voice comes over the intercom. Yes, sir, your 11 o'clock appointment is here. Well, tell him to come back tomorrow morning around 8. I have an emergency meeting coming up, and I'm going to be in there for several hours. And cancel the rest of the interviews. Well, Clark was a little disappointed, but he understood. The receptionist says, okay, Mr. White, I'll tell him. Well, after she let go of the intercom button, Clark said, well, I heard everything, so 8 o'clock tomorrow morning? The receptionist says, yes, let me just write it down in my schedule book. All right, got you down for 8 o'clock. See you tomorrow morning, Mr. Kent, she says. Clark says, well, thank you, I'll see you tomorrow morning. Then he looked at the receptionist's name tag, Linda. Have a good day, said Clark. Well, Clark goes back towards the elevator. As the elevator door opens, a young, dark-haired woman comes dashing out. She runs right into Clark. Of course, Clark, being molecularly dense, didn't budge when she bumped into him full speed, and she falls back onto the ground. Clark's like, oh, dear madam, I'm sorry. He goes to help her up, and then quickly gets back down to collect all her paperwork that fell, and quickly put it together, put it back inside sloppily in her file folder that she had in her hand. He gives it back to her and is like, I'm terribly sorry, ma'am. He noticed she had striking blue eyes. She was very beautiful. He was a little smitten by her. She's like, well, sir, you better watch where you're going. But I'm sorry, too. I should have paid attention. But next time you see me dash out the elevator, get out of my way. I'm a very busy woman, she says. Clark's like, I'll make a note of that. He goes to the elevator, but he couldn't stop looking at that young, attractive woman that was heading right into the newsroom. He gets back on the elevator and heads back down and leaves. Well, the next morning, 8 o'clock, he arrives back at the receptionist desk in front of the newsroom, and he says, "Hi, Linda, I'm back for my 8 o'clock." She's like, "Yes, Mr. White is expecting you, sir. Just go right through these double doors and into the newsroom." Well, Clark ventured through the double doors into the busy newsroom. It was a typical newsroom. It was busy, and everybody was running around, typing away, or delivering something to somebody else. Clark makes his way through the busy newsroom, and there he bumps into somebody else. It was a young kid, probably in his late teens, early 20s. He had blue eyes and he had black hair. He looks and he's like, "Oh, I'm sorry, sir. I'm sorry. Wait a minute. I've never seen you here before. Who are you?" Clark introduced himself. "My name's Clark Kent. I'm trying to apply for a job here. I'm going to interview with your boss." The kid introduced himself. It's like, "Wow. Okay, my name is Jimmy Olsen. I'm the photographer here. Well, I wish you luck and I hope you get the job, Mr. Kent. I gotta go. I have to get some photos." Well, Clark makes his way to the door of the editor-in-chief. The sign said Perry White. Then Clark proceeds to knock on the door. He hears a voice scream at him, says, "Come on!" Clark opens the door, and he's like, "Excuse me, Mr. White. I'm Clark Kent. I'm here for the job interview." Perry White was a short, middle-aged man, graying hair, and a goatee. He says, "Ah, yes, Mr. Kent, come in. Have a seat." Well, Clark sits down and puts his briefcase on his lap, opens up the briefcase, and hands his portfolio to Mr. White. Perry White looks through the portfolio quickly and it's like, Clark was getting a little worried because the sounds of the was not like the approving that he was looking for. Clark figured that this interview was going to be a big, long run. Well, meanwhile, in another part of the city, the public was gathered to witness a new experimental space shuttle that was being tried out. It was the brand new LexCorp Luxstar space plane, an experimental space shuttle with the intent to replace the aging space shuttles that were about to be retired by NASA. It was designed and built by LexCorp, one of the biggest companies in Metropolis, and whose CEO, Lex Luthor, was watching it from the comfort of his own office. Well, the space plane was flying around the city and the area, testing out the engines and just showing off. It was going to eventually land in the Air Force Base in Metropolis. Inside the cockpit of the new space plane was Lois Lane, the young woman that Clark bumped into the day before. She was one of the lucky reporters to get the privilege to sit inside the very cockpit of this new space plane. Meanwhile, Captain Tomlinson was explaining the whole thing about how this new shuttle works, what it can do, what it's gonna be able to do in the future, what upgrades and everything. Suddenly he hears a radio chatter, and it said, "Captain Tomlinson, get ready to begin your descent to the Air Force Base." Well, Tomlinson starts hitting a few buttons on the console. Then Captain Tomlinson turns around to Lois and says, "You're going to witness the brand new state-of-the-art autopilot at work. It's going to do the rest of the flying and landing for us." Soon as Tomlinson finishes the rest of the button input with his co-pilot, suddenly the computer screen starts screwing up and displaying all weird patterns and boo-boos. The computer was glitching up. Lois looks and says, "Captain Tomlinson, is that normal?" And suddenly Tomlinson was shocked. He's like, "Oh, damn it, the computer's screwing up. Oh no, this is not good," he says. Suddenly, the space plane's engines go on full blast, sending them uncontrollably high into the sky as everybody was panicking. And Tomlinson, the co-pilot, and the other astronaut on board was trying to get everything under control, but the computer was just keeping on glitching. Well, the space plane shot up 30,000 feet into the air, causing panic to Lois and all the astronauts on board that were piloting the thing. They were trying their darndest to get the space plane stabilized, but the software kept glitching. But after several minutes of fighting with the computer and trying to get control of the space plane, the glitch stopped. Finally, the display screens read, "Good morning," and stayed like that. Then the space plane began diving down at high speed. And, well, Tomlinson and the rest of the astronauts tried to gain control while Lois was about to crap the flight suit that she was wearing. Then all of a sudden, the plane stabilized and was flying normal, but the computer was still reading "Good morning," and the flight controls were unresponsive. But they got radio back, and Tomlinson said, "This is Captain Tomlinson, mayday, mayday. The Black Star has conked out on us. The computer glitched out and it just keeps reading 'Good morning.' We have no control. Repeat, we have no control over this plane. I don't know where it's flying to, and I don't know if where it's gonna land. We need help. We need help. Repeat." Meanwhile, back at the Daily Planet building, well, Clark's job interview was over. Mr. White looks at Clark, hands him back his portfolio, and is like, "Well, Kent, I'll tell you something, kid. You've got the experience, but not the experience I'm looking for. I'm looking for someone that had more newsroom experience. An experienced newspaper journalist, not a freelancer. But if all doesn't go well for me finding somebody to hire, I will consider you again." "Well," he said, "Mr. Kent," and as he shook his hands, "I wish you luck, kid." Suddenly, Jimmy Olsen comes storming into Mr. White's office. White gets angry. He's like, "God damn it, Olsen, what have I told you? You knock on the door when you come into my office." He's like, "Oh, I'm sorry, Chief. I'm sorry." Then White screams at Olsen again, "Damn it, Jimmy. I told you, do not call me Chief." "Oh, I'm sorry, Mr. White, but it's that new LexCorp space shuttle. It's gone on the fritz, and it's going on a crash course to the Air Force Base. They're trying their damnedest to get it up and running again, but that thing is just flying on its own. It's a computer glitch of sorts." White's like, "Oh my goodness. Oh no, Lois is on board. Oh man. Olsen, what are you standing there for? Get your camera, go down there, and take Johansson with you. Hurry, hurry." Jimmy runs out of the office. Clark gets up and says, "Excuse me, Mr. White. What if I could bring you that story?" Perry White looks at Clark and is like, "Are you serious, kid? Are you serious?" Clark's like, "Yes, Mr. White, I'm serious. I can do it, or I can try. I really need this job." White says, "All right, kid. If you can do it, you got the job." In Perry's mind, he knows the impossible. Well, Clark races downstairs. He leaves the Daily Planet building. He knew this was the best time to change into his alter ego, Superman, but he needed a place to change. He looked around and around, but he saw nothing. Clark looked at the sky. He saw some big white clouds flying by. He figured, maybe I can fly through the clouds and change into my alter ego. So he looks around, takes his glasses off, puts it in his chest pocket of his business suit, makes sure the coast is clear, and he takes off, flying high speed. He flies right into the cloud, and as soon as he exits the other end of the cloud, he was in his new costume, flying right towards the Air Force Base at high speed. Well, his flying was not going to go unnoticed. Meanwhile, in the control tower of the Air Force Base, the radar was showing clear. But the young lieutenant who was manning the radar station noticed something besides the space plane on radar. The radar was beeping. Beep, beep, beep. It was coming fast. It was coming towards them. The lieutenant turns around and is like, "Colonel, sir, there's something on radar. It's too small to be an airplane." The colonel looks, "What do you mean, son?" He goes up to the radar station and looks at it. He sees the image. Beep, 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 beep. It was small, too small for an airplane, but it was coming at them fast. And it's like, the colonel was like, "My God, it's coming this way." Suddenly, they looked out the window, and they see Superman flying right towards them, and suddenly he flew by the control tower at high speeds. They were shocked. It was the first time they ever saw a flying man. Well, Superman was flying fast, flying towards the endangered space plane. Meanwhile, things were not peachy in the space plane cockpit as Lois Lane was terrified, and the astronauts were trying their darndest to get everything back under control, but that space plane was flying itself right for the Air Force Base on a crash course. But all hope was not lost, because suddenly, right in front of them, outside the window, they could see from the cockpit the object that was flying at them at high speed. It was Superman. He was coming in fast. Lois is like, "Is that a flying man?" Captain Tomlinson is like, "I see it too." The other guys on the cockpit were like, "Yeah, hey, we're not. I think we're all hallucinating. Can we all be hallucinating the same thing?" Lois says, "I doubt that. That is a flying man." Well, Superman flies to the back of the space plane. With his X-ray vision, he sees where some wires were at for the engine. That was his first priority, shut down that main engine. So he yanks off a panel, revealing some wires and piping and everything. Then Superman uses heat vision to sever the wiring. Thus, with the heat vision, he severs the wire and shuts down the main engine. He then flies in front of the space plane, getting underneath it and causing resistance to slow down the space plane and bringing it to a complete stop. Now, he was, with his super strength, he was guiding the space plane and carrying it back to the Air Force Base. He lands it on the tarmac with very little effort. Well, his actions did draw a crowd. Everybody came running around to see the flying man that saved the space plane. Well, the emergency door blew open and the inflatable slide came out. The astronauts and Lois Lane came sliding down. They wanted to see this flying man, who he was. Well, everybody was surrounding him and everything. They were like, "Who are you? What are you? Where do you come from?" Superman's like, "Well, hey, everybody, just give me room, give me room. Well, I'm a friend, and I'm here to help people. You can call me Superman." Everybody's like, "Wow, Superman. Wow." Meanwhile, Lois Lane forced her way through the crowd of people, screaming, excuse me, I'm Lois Lane, reporter for the Daily Planet. Who are you? What are you? How did you save us? How can you fly?" Well, Superman says, okay, I'll reveal everything in due time, people. But please, everybody stand back. I gotta go. What? Everybody's like, what? Just, please, people, said Superman. Please, stand back. Please, seriously, stand back. Then Superman proceeds to rocket into the sky, breaking the sound barrier. Meanwhile, everybody was shocked and amazed. They just witnessed a man shoot off into the heavens, breaking the sound barrier. Lois just was looking up at the sky and just passed out from shock on the ground. Everybody surrounded her and tried to get her to regain consciousness. Well, several hours later, Lois Lane comes running back into the Daily Planet, still wearing the flight suit that she was given. And she says, Mr. White, I just stumbled onto the story of a century. Some flying man. Don't explain to me how, but there's a lot of witnesses. Just saved the space plane that was in danger. Well, Perry White says, calm down, Lois. I know about it already. We already got the story. Lois is like, what? How? Let's just say there was somebody else there that got the story and brought it back to me before then. There was even an empty desk around I let him type it up on. Well, Lois was like shocked, and she's like, who's this guy? Perry says, Mr. Kent, come in. Clark comes in with his big glasses and big smile, and he says to Clark, knockout job, kid, knockout job. Then Clark asks $1 million question. Does that mean I get the job, Mr. White? Perry White says, you've been on the payroll for hours, kid. And he shows him tomorrow's newspaper headlines. Clark grabs it and looks at it, and it says, Daily Planet, Kate Wonder saves space plane from crashing. Lois was angry. Like, wait a minute. You beat me there? You beat me to the story? Clark's like, yes, I was there the whole time when actually, as soon as the news broke out about the space plane being in danger, I quickly got over there. Lois is like, but how? How? The whole area was cordoned off. Well, I don't know, says Clark. Maybe I flew. Meanwhile, in the famed LexCorp building on the top office, where Lex Luthor's office is at, he was sitting in his office reviewing the video of the whole rescue that was caught on film. Lex Luthor was a young man, and about in his early 30s. He was just looking at in amazement. It's like, so, a man that can fly. Who is this man? The end. Like and subscribe.